Hi automotive enthusiasts, welcome to Octane Origins, where today we take a deep dive into one of the most audacious motorcycles to ever roll out of Italy, the Ducati Streetfighter V4. This is not just another stripped-down sport bike. It's a radical reimagining of what a naked motorcycle can be, born from the DNA of the Panigale V4 superbike, yet retooled for an entirely different mission. Ducati's decision to unleash a 200-plus horsepower naked rocket raised more than a few eyebrows when it was first revealed. Because naked bikes were traditionally seen as everyday machines, approachable, versatile, and more forgiving than their fully fared track-focused cousins. By tearing away the bodywork and leaving the Panigale's superbike heart exposed, Ducati wasn't just challenging category norms, it was redefining them. This bike became a lightning rod in conversations about how much power is too much, and whether the boundary between street usability and racetrack ferocity could, or should, be blurred. That tension is what makes the Streetfighter V4 such a compelling subject for us today. Over the next stretch of this journey, we'll explore three key phases that tell its story in full dimension. First, we'll trace how Ducati went from building race-bred thoroughbreds to making the bold decision to strip one down and release it into the naked market. Then we'll dive into the engineering ballet behind the Streetfighter V4, where aerodynamic trickery, chassis recalibration, and advanced electronics came together to wrestle control out of chaos and create a bike that's both untamed and disciplined. Finally, we'll look at what happened once the Streetfighter V4 hit the streets and the broader motorcycle world, examining its cultural impact, the competitive ripple effects, and the way it reshaped expectations for what a naked bike could or should be. This isn't just the story of a machine. It's the story of a gamble Ducati took at a crossroads moment, one that could have looked like reckless showmanship, but instead carved out an entirely new benchmark. So settle in, because this ride will carry us from the spark of a daring idea to the roar of its real-world consequences. And by the end, you'll understand why the Streetfighter V4 wasn't just an outlier, but a defining statement in modern motorcycling. Let's get started. Ducati's Streetfighter V4 didn't appear in a vacuum. It was born from a long tradition of pushing limits while constantly recalibrating what riders expected from Bologna's red rockets. To understand why Ducati made such a bold move, we need to rewind to the late 2000s when the first Streetfighter emerged. Back then, Ducati's formula was relatively straightforward. Take the powerful 1098 superbike engine, remove the fairings, tweak the ergonomics, and create a raw, muscular machine that looked and felt aggressive. It was a success in certain markets, but not a world-dominating hit, partly because it lived in a strange space between practical street bike and brutal sport machine. The Streetfighter name went quiet after 2015, leaving many to wonder if Ducati had abandoned the idea. Microstory. In 2019, whispers began circulating that Ducati would resurrect the Streetfighter name. This time, however, insiders hinted it wouldn't be just another variant. The company had been developing the Panigale V4, a masterpiece of engineering that shocked the world with its Desmosedici Stradale V4 engine, derived directly from MotoGP technology. The idea of taking that power plant and dropping it into a naked bike seemed reckless to some, but to Ducati, it was an opportunity to dominate a segment that had grown stale. The stage was set for something unprecedented. Context digest. At that moment, the naked motorcycle market was undergoing a shift. Traditional naked bikes emphasized versatility and ease of use, while the so-called hyper-nakeds from brands like KTM, Aprilia, and Yamaha had started escalating performance. Riders wanted bikes that felt thrilling yet accessible, machines that could dominate a canyon road on Sunday while still being rideable during the week. Ducati saw a gap. No one had truly pushed naked bikes into the superbike stratosphere. The Streetfighter V4 was designed to fill that vacuum. Microstory. Ducati's unveiling of the Streetfighter V4 at EICMA in 2019 was a moment of theater. Stripped of bodywork but flaunting aerodynamic winglets, aggressive lines, and a stance that screamed menace, it was instantly polarizing. Some enthusiasts were ecstatic, calling it the most beautiful naked bike ever made, while skeptics dismissed it as impractical overkill. Yet the buzz was undeniable, and Ducati had captured the world's attention. The message was clear: this wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a challenge to the industry. Reflection bridge. The daring design choice opened the door to questions about how such extreme power could possibly be managed on public roads, and whether Ducati could balance spectacle with usability. Microstory. Early test rides by professionals revealed both the brilliance and the danger of the Streetfighter V4. The sheer thrust of the engine was intoxicating, but it was the aerodynamics that stole the show. Ducati engineers had fitted small winglets on either side of the front, a feature borrowed from MotoGP, generating downforce to keep the front wheel planted under brutal acceleration. What could have been a wheelie-prone monster became a controllable beast. A revelation that proved Ducati wasn't just chasing headlines, but seriously addressing the challenges of street riding a superbike engine. Context digest. Winglets weren't the only trick. The geometry of the frame was recalibrated for stability rather than razor-sharp track handling, making the bike less twitchy at high speed. Electronics, including traction control, wheelie control, and cornering ABS, created a safety net that allowed riders to explore power levels once unthinkable in this category. Ducati wasn't naive. They knew unleashing 200-plus horsepower on city streets demanded more than bravado. The Streetfighter V4 was an exercise in taming chaos through technology. Micro story. The launch also revealed Ducati's knack for branding. By calling it the Fight Formula, they framed the bike not just as a machine but as a philosophy. It wasn't meant to be a watered-down superbike or a commuter-friendly naked. It was unapologetically radical, designed for riders who wanted the adrenaline of a racetrack distilled into everyday life. Ducati was betting big that enough enthusiasts craved this blend of spectacle and control to make the Streetfighter V4 a success. Reflection bridge. The gamble carried real stakes because if Ducati failed, it would reinforce the notion that hypernakeds had a ceiling and no one should attempt to break it. Context digest. But Ducati had an ace up its sleeve: heritage. The company had always thrived on risk-taking, from desmodromic valves to the L-twin layout to its MotoGP experiments. The Streetfighter V4 was in many ways a culmination of this tradition, an embodiment of Ducati's willingness to risk ridicule for the sake of rewriting the rulebook. That heritage not only justified the gamble, but amplified its resonance in the motorcycle world. Micro story. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Streetfighter V4's rise was how quickly it became a benchmark. Competitors scrambled to compare their hyper-nakeds against it, whether in terms of power, electronics, or styling. KTM's Super Duke R, Aprilia's Tuono V4, and even Triumph's Speed Triple suddenly looked tame by comparison. The Ducati wasn't just entering the segment, it was redrawing its borders, forcing everyone else to react. As the buzz turned into real-world riding experiences, a deeper story emerged about how Ducati engineered not just a headline grabber, but a functioning machine that pushed riders into new territory. That's where the true genius of the Streetfighter V4 comes into focus. When the first wave of riders threw a leg over the Streetfighter V4, the narrative shifted from hype to lived experience. What they discovered was both exhilarating and daunting. The bike delivered relentless acceleration that felt closer to launch control on a race car than to any traditional motorcycle. Yet it was tempered by electronics that constantly worked in the background. Riders began to appreciate that this wasn't a stripped superbike in the reckless sense, but a deliberate evolution designed to function in the real world. Micro story. One seasoned rider recounted how the Streetfighter V4 transformed his daily commute into a visceral event. He wasn't pushing the limits on public roads, but even modest throttle inputs provided more acceleration than many sport bikes at full tilt. The key wasn't reckless speed. It was the sensation of endless reserve power at his fingertips. That sensation created a new category of riding experience, one where thrill didn't depend on redline antics, but on the knowledge that untapped ferocity lurked just below. Context digest. Ducati had created a paradox, a motorcycle too powerful to be fully unleashed on public roads, yet engineered to remain enjoyable at sane speeds. This was possible because of its torque-rich delivery, ergonomic setup, and confidence-inspiring electronics. By designing a bike that didn't demand constant track-level aggression, Ducati ensured that even average riders could taste the essence of MotoGP-derived performance without risking life and limb. Micro story. The first major group tests in Europe and the US highlighted another layer: adaptability. Riders could toggle between modes that dramatically altered throttle response, suspension stiffness, and electronic intervention. In sport mode, it felt like a precise scalpel. In street mode, it became surprisingly docile. Track mode, of course, revealed its full savagery. These modes weren't gimmicks. They allowed the Streetfighter V4 to straddle multiple identities in ways its rivals struggled to match. Reflection bridge. That adaptability raised an intriguing question. Was Ducati democratizing extreme performance, or was it simply building an elite toy for those who could afford it? Microstory: the Streetfighter V4 wasn't cheap. With premium pricing and optional extras that pushed it even higher, it became a status symbol as much as a performance weapon. In cities like Los Angeles, New York, and Miami, the bike turned into a rolling statement piece, drawing attention at every stoplight. For some buyers, ownership was as much about the spectacle of being seen on the wildest naked bike on the market as it was about riding dynamics. Context digest. Yet, beneath the glitz, Ducati's decision to go all in on power had cultural consequences. Riders began comparing the Streetfighter V4 to muscle cars and superbikes, blurring categories that were once neatly divided. Motorcycle culture thrives on identity. Cruiser guys, sport bike loyalists, adventure riders, and the Streetfighter V4 seemed to disrupt those tribes by appealing across lines. It became equally admired at track days and bike nights, a crossover success rare in motorcycling. Microstory. Critics did surface, pointing out that most riders would never use half the Streetfighter V4's potential. Why not create a lighter, less intimidating naked bike instead? Ducati's counterpoint was subtle but clear. The Streetfighter wasn't about need, it was about aspiration. Much like a supercar that idles in traffic yet symbolizes cutting-edge performance, the Streetfighter V4 existed to stretch imaginations. By doing so, it elevated Ducati's brand halo across the lineup, even for customers who ended up buying monsters or scramblers. Reflection bridge. That aspirational role was key to understanding why the Streetfighter V4 mattered beyond its spec sheet. It wasn't just a product. It was a message about Ducati's place in the future of motorcycling. Context digest. As the months passed, sales numbers confirmed Ducati's instincts. The Streetfighter V4 quickly became one of their best sellers, proving that there was real appetite for a hyper-naked that refused compromise. Ducati's rivals intensified development of their own Halo Nakeds, leading to a performance arms race that continues today. What started as a gamble was now shaping the market, forcing others to catch up or be left behind. Microstory. Track events provided further evidence of the Streetfighter V4's duality. Riders who would never consider piloting a Panigale V4 around a circuit found themselves tackling track days on the Streetfighter with confidence. Its ergonomics made longer sessions less punishing, and its electronic safety net gave amateurs the courage to explore limits. Ducati had created a machine that expanded the reach of track culture by lowering barriers, without lowering standards. By the time the dust settled, it was clear that the Streetfighter V4 had gone from curiosity to icon, and its success carried profound implications for Ducati's strategy moving forward. The question now became, what legacy would this machine leave behind, and how would it shape the next generation of motorcycles? As the Streetfighter V4 matured from a headline grabber into an established part of Ducati's portfolio, the conversation shifted toward its long-term influence. It wasn't enough to be fast or outrageous. Lasting impact required changing the rules of the game. And in many ways, that's exactly what it accomplished. Ducati had proven that a hyper-naked could carry superbike power responsibly, that it could be both terrifying on paper and surprisingly approachable on the road. This wasn't a novelty anymore. It was a template. Microstory. The introduction of the Streetfighter V4S and later the even more exotic Streetfighter V4 SP showed Ducati doubling down on the formula. With lightweight wheels, upgraded suspension, and unique finishes, these variants weren't just marketing fluff. They were proof that Ducati intended to expand the Streetfighter into a family of models. Riders now had tiers of insanity to choose from, reinforcing the idea that this wasn't a one-off stunt, but a cornerstone of Ducati's future strategy. Context digest. Competitors reacted predictably. KTM sharpened its Super Duke R, Aprilia enhanced the Tuono, and even Japanese manufacturers began revisiting their naked lineups with more aggressive specs. Ducati's gamble had redefined the benchmark, and no serious player could ignore it. This ripple effect is perhaps the clearest sign of legacy. When rivals alter course in response, the instigator has already reshaped the landscape. Microstory. One of the most striking legacies came not from the spec sheet, but from the cultural perception of naked bikes. Before the Streetfighter V4, many riders saw naked machines as either beginner-friendly standards or toned-down sport bikes for those who didn't want the full racer posture. After the Streetfighter, that perception shifted dramatically. Suddenly, naked bikes weren't compromises. They were statements of excess and confidence, machines that wore their mechanical hearts on their sleeves without apology. Reflection bridge. That cultural shift highlighted a bigger question. Could this redefine what mainstream riders aspired to, not just what hardcore enthusiasts demanded? Micro-story, dealerships began to notice a pattern. Customers who might have aimed for mid-tier sport bikes or even entry-level superbikes were suddenly setting their sights higher, drawn by the aura of the Streetfighter V4. Even if they left with a more modest model, their benchmark for what was desirable had been permanently elevated. Ducati had successfully positioned the Streetfighter as a halo product that pulled the entire brand upward. Context digest. The legacy also extends into design language. The aggressive stance, winglet integration, and bold visual identity influenced not only Ducati's later models, but also competitors seeking to capture some of the same magnetism. Styling cues like exposed mechanical aggression and aerodynamic add-ons started appearing in unexpected places, showing how Ducati's choices trickled down across the industry. Micro-story. Beyond industry and culture, the Streetfighter V4 also impacted rider psychology. For many, it became the embodiment of modern motorcycling's paradox: extreme performance tamed by extreme electronics. Riders debated whether this reliance on software dulled the purity of riding or made it more accessible. In practice, it did both. Purists lamented the intrusion, while a new generation embraced it as the path forward. Either way, Ducati had sparked a conversation that went deeper than horsepower figures. It was about the evolving relationship between man, machine, and code. Reflection bridge. This philosophical debate ensured that the Streetfighter V4 wouldn't just be remembered for numbers, but for raising essential questions about where motorcycles are headed. Context digest. As electric motorcycles loom on the horizon and regulations tighten, the Streetfighter V4 represents a high watermark for combustion excess. It may be one of the last gas-powered bikes to flaunt unrestrained horsepower with so few compromises. That gives it a certain historic weight, a place in the timeline of motorcycling evolution as both a peak and perhaps the end of an era. Micro-story. Enthusiasts decades from now may look back on the Streetfighter V4 the way car enthusiasts recall the muscle car era of the 1960s. A moment when engineers pushed machines to audacious heights before societal shifts forced a new direction. Its legend will live not only in Ducati showrooms and collector garages, but also in the mythology of motorcycling as a symbol of when naked bikes stopped playing by traditional rules. Ultimately, the Streetfighter V4's resolution is clear. It didn't just succeed as a product. It rewrote expectations, forced competitors to evolve, and redefined what riders could imagine. In doing so, it secured its place as one of the defining motorcycles of the 21st century, a naked rocket no one saw coming, but everyone had to acknowledge once it arrived. So here we are, automotive enthusiasts, looking back on the Ducati Streetfighter V4, not just as a machine, but as a moment in history. What began as a risky idea, to strip the bodywork off a superbike and release it as a naked rocket, ended up changing the rules of motorcycling. Ducati managed to walk the line between chaos and control, pairing outrageous power with electronics and design features that made it accessible in ways no one thought possible. It wasn't simply about speed. It was about proving that extremes could be engineered into daily life without losing their edge. The broader takeaway is that the Streetfighter V4 became more than a product. It became a statement. It signaled that the naked category could be aspirational, that motorcycles could balance ferocity with sophistication, and that Ducati's DNA of risk-taking still has the power to reshape the industry. Competitors responded, riders debated, and the culture itself evolved around its presence. That's the mark of true impact, when a single machine forces everyone else to move differently. For riders, the Streetfighter V4 will always carry dual meaning. On the one hand, it's a wild, unrelenting performance icon. On the other, it's a symbol of how modern engineering can tame the untamable. It has secured its place as both a pinnacle of combustion excess and a turning point toward the software-driven, safety net future of motorcycles. Few bikes can claim to have shifted the conversation so completely. And so, as we close this ride together, Remember that the Ducati Streetfighter V4 isn't just a naked superbike. It's the naked rocket no one saw coming, and one that redefined what was possible when boldness meets engineering mastery. Thanks for riding with us on Octane Origins. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.